My name is Carrie-Anne Holland. I work at Klaviyo. I'm joined by Lauren Wallace today for the session. I have a whole spiel, but I feel like part of it got covered. I will just say, if you've been going to Denver startup sessions all week, kudos on the stamina. We were not sure when we were slated in the very last session of the conference how many people would be wandering in. So how many people have gone to a couple of other Denver Startup Week sessions? Most of you? Okay, cool. Well, hopefully you had a good time. And yeah, thanks again to the sponsors. I'm sure if you've gone to sessions, you've already heard this is like the nation's biggest free startup week. So we really appreciate Emerge and all of the other conference sponsors. Also, I need to say, by being here, you're consenting to the code of conduct. You're also consenting to have your photo taken and potentially being videotaped as part of the session. I don't see any paparazzis, but I'm just supposed to say this. And last but not least, you can hype our session or anything else you want to say about Denver Startup Week at #DenStartupWeek. Cool. I'm going to hand it over to Lauren to kick us off.
Great. Thank you so much. You're here today to learn about the 4 conversations that managers should be having with their direct reports. First, we wanted to start with why we wanted to put this session together. Carrie and I actually met at Google. She was my manager. And Google, being the massive company that it is, has a lot of resources and guidance for managers, clarity on what that role should look like, and what their employees would benefit from. We know that startups don't often have those clear roles and responsibilities, all of the resources that we get to benefit from at larger companies. So we wanted to put this session together to make sure that employees, regardless of the size of their organization, can benefit from that guidance and career mentoring from their managers. And their managers can build the strong foundational relationships they need with their employees to be really successful. So from this session, we hope that you'll take away, as either a manager or an individual contributor. Most folks do have bosses, so most of us are individual contributors in some way. We have managers that we're working with above, and then some of us are also managers who have folks that we're working with who report into us. So both roles, hopefully, will take something away from this presentation. And you'll be able to strengthen both your performance and your relationship with that other person.
Just a quick poll. How many here identify as people managers? Okay, cool. How many of you have a manager? Probably most of you. Okay. Very cool if you have a career where you don't have a manager. Great. Yeah. So, I mean, like Lauren said, we're really trying to focus on making content that, will be helpful for managers. But if you are an IC and you have a manager that's maybe not having these conversations with you, or maybe not covering the topics that you feel like you could be getting out of those conversations, it's meant to help you sort of feel empowered to direct them.
Definitely. So the 4 conversations we'll be talking about today: career conversations, expectations, performance conversations, and then compensation conversations. These tend to bleed into each other a little bit. So as we talk about one, we'll certainly mention some of the others. And depending on the company, they might be occurring simultaneously or separately. But again, we want to empower you to make sure that over the course of a year, you're touching on these topics with your manager, your direct report. I'll pass it over to Carrie to talk about career.
Cool. So we wanted to kick off with career partially because ideally that is going to be the first conversation that you're having with a new manager as you kick off that relationship. Also, ideally, something that you are connecting on with on some sort of recurring basis. So why have a career conversation? And we're talking about career conversations, again, separate from your performance conversation, separate from your comp conversation. For ICs, the advantage of having these conversations is it creates some routine of accountability in reflecting on your career. And not just like, who do I want to be in 5 years, but like, What experiences am I having? What experiences do I want to have? What are my values? What are my personal strengths? These things can change throughout your career, so just having that moment to check in is really helpful. It's also a nice opportunity to voice your preferences. So like working style preferences, things that are going to help you work best, you can express at this moment in time, just as things that make you unique. And last but not least, I have found this to be a nice moment to ask your manager questions that maybe there isn't space for in other forums. So like if you're getting a performance review, you're not going to say, and what's your performance like? But with a career conversation, I like to be able to, ask, so like, what are you thinking about in your career right now? What skills are you working on as a manager? To have that kind of two-way exchange. For managers, this is a nice opportunity to help your ICs, help understand your ICs a little bit better. So you're seeing on a day-to-day basis one facet of who they are, one facet of their behaviors, given the assignments that they have. But you have a future together. You are designing or co-designing with them what their work is, how they're operating, what opportunities get matched with them. So it's a nice moment to also collect some information that's going to help you do that. And for both, it's a nice time to connect on a human level, more so maybe than performance or comp conversations. Still be human for those conversations too, though. We wanted to talk about, for each conversation, the kind of what of the conversation. Because we're talking about, like, these are things that ICs can think about, these are things that also managers can think about. We didn't want to focus on who, but really, like, any of these things, if you pick your own adventure, are going to help you have a robust conversation. So a lot of times people, when they're coming into a career conversation, they're thinking about goals. They're thinking about like maybe talking about a promotion, things like that. A lot of the things I have on this slide are meant to sort of zoom out bigger. So what are your career values? This list of career values, I'm just going to talk through really quickly. Hopefully, try not to auctioneer it, but like it's a list that comes from a professor, Kristen Shockley's research paper on subjective career success. And there are different dimensions that different people care about in different amounts. So we start off with authenticity, the extent to which you get to have a career that is connected to what you care about personally. So for example, if somebody's like, I really need to be expressive in my day-to-day work, that would be sort of within the category of trying to have an authentic career. Growth and development, exactly as it sounds, learning throughout your career, prioritizing learning. Influence would be having an impact on not only your work, but the work of others and the organization that you're in as a whole. Meaningful work, work that connects to your personal values or social good, however you define that. Having a meaningful personal life, so having a career that supports your ability to have an excellent time when you close your laptop. Quality work, I generally associate as like craftsmanship, and then recognition would be getting recognized by people that are important to you in settings that you value. So these can be really helpful to talk through, like, what's the top one for you? What are the top three for you? Obviously, all of us probably want all of these things, but it's a nice starting point of like, what defines you, what motivates you. Moving on to skills, a lot of times, if you have a new manager, there may be some amount of like, what skills do you have? But I would encourage you to think about it from the perspective of also, what skills is the IC using right now? And what skills are they not using that they possess? Because they probably have many that you don't get to see on a day-to-day basis. And then also, where are they motivated to develop their skills? Where do they see gaps that might be relevant to where they want to be going? I'll just touch on goals briefly. I think that the thing with goals is it's very easy to anchor on tangible things, like a promotion, like something that's very extrinsic. But the timeline is whatever you want to make it. So it could be who you want to be in 2 years. It could be who you want to be in the next quarter. And a goal doesn't have to be something that is so external as a promotion. It could be having better work-life balance because that's something that's really making you miserable right now. How you'd like to be rewarded and recognized. I think, again, like this is one of those things where if you want to talk about it, there's just some people who would like to never have happy birthday sung to them. Right? And so, you know, I think most people are fine with like a shout out in a meeting or like, you know, might appreciate some sort of award. There are some people who feel very uncomfortable getting awarded or recognized publicly. So it's a nice moment to talk about those kind of things. And then, as I mentioned, having manager Q&A time. So reserving time for you to, you know, answer questions as a manager, ask them as an IC. For each of these conversations, we're going to talk about ways they can go wrong. So I think the primary way a career conversation can go wrong is if it starts to become a performance review or a promotion conversation. So part of why I talk about career motivations and skill development and things like that, these are zooming out on like the how of their career. So like, what do they want to be experiencing? And a little bit less of these concrete goals. You should be talking about trajectory towards promotion if that's on the person's radar, but I guess I would advocate for try to make some separate time because that can take all the air out of the room. And like on a similar note, managers probably shouldn't be talking the majority of this conversation. And managers, if you are talking, make sure that the things that you're saying are questions, because it's really meant to be, you know, helping the IC reflect and helping them, you know, voice whatever they feel willing to share about their career development. And then also, people love to talk about who owns your career and own your career, et cetera, et cetera. And I would just say, like, I don't think it's a black and white thing, partially because each manager that you're ever going to have in your career is different. And each IC that you're going to manage is going to be different. And so it's helpful as an IC if you have things you want to cover. I would encourage every IC to like be trying to have this type of conversation. It might not be on your manager's radar to have one, and suggest whatever structure you would like to have. And I think managers can come to the table and say, this is a format that I've used that I've liked. Do you like it? Do you want to do a different format? Things like that can help nudge the ICs that maybe don't feel comfortable or don't know what to talk about with a career conversation. All right, so now we have a Q&A, I guess. Not Q&A, open question for you all. Would any of you like to share an example of a good or bad career conversation that you've had?
You had it spot on where the career conversations usually slide into the promotion conversation, because it's like you ask a person like, what do you want? Oh, I want more money. Well, let's figure out how to get you promoted. It's just tough to come back to, hey, what you really want to focus on. Like, that's the example of a bad one.
Does anybody else have oh, okay, sorry.
A really bad career conversation I had was actually at my last job. I work at an MRI place, and it was a very toxic environment. And I really wanted to leave, but I was, of course, when I announced me leaving, I always had the other coworkers try to ask me where I was going. I tried to be really vague about it, you know, and I mostly succeeded in that until my boss came up to me literally right behind my back, and then he sits down and he goes, I really need to know, was it only like monetary reasons you're leaving us? Like, I really want you to be honest with me and tell me why. I just felt so blindsided, and like, this wasn't even in a private office. This was literally at a front desk. Anybody could come in and just see this conversation, and I just felt very caged in because of it, and I felt like it was a big violation of my privacy. Ironically, I feel like it would have been more private if it was through email even, but because there was that chance anybody could walk in, I just felt I also had to be vague to him, and I felt very put on the spot.
Yeah, I think that's a really great theme to highlight with any of these conversations of giving a little notice, either if you're an IC initiating these conversations or if you're a manager initiating the conversation, giving context, not just like dropping time on somebody's calendar or approaching somebody, letting them know, hey, here's the conversation I'd like to have, here's what I'm hoping to accomplish, to have any of these conversations. And it's especially helpful to tailor and create individual moments for each of these conversations.
So next up, we're going to talk about performance expectations conversations.
Yeah, thanks. So first, I want to make sure we're on the same page about expectations, really just what somebody's job is. If they have specific goals, if they are in charge of a specific portfolio of work, that's what I'm talking about when I say expectations. So for ICs, incredibly beneficial to have clear expectations. You know what you're held accountable for, what's in your portfolio, what are your roles and responsibilities, and hopefully these feed in nicely to a performance rating if that's something that your company has. You can see that through line over the course of a year. You can also identify opportunities where you want to grow and stretch your skill set and share those with your manager. Try to carve out areas in your portfolio where you can flex and learn. And then, you do have to be a little vulnerable, but share that this is the first time you're trying this new thing. You know it's a growth opportunity, you're excited about it, but you're hoping your manager can support you and give you coaching and feedback along the way. Really a win-win for both the manager and the IC. For managers, you get to partner with your employees, your ICs, to figure out what needs to be done and who specifically is going to do it. And when you do this with all of the folks on your team, there's clear roles and responsibilities. You know who is on point for each aspect of the work across your team. You can make sure they're pretty evenly load balanced and that hopefully everybody has an opportunity to stretch and grow. And then finally for both, you get to align on what good looks like, and bonus points if you can align on what exceeding those expectations would look like, or even what somebody in kind of the next level role would do to approach those expectations, what that level of success looks like. So similarly, what kind of content should you cover in an expectations conversation? A framework that I've seen across several companies is to think about work as what you do and how you do it. So the what and the how. The what is those really concrete, tactical, here are your goals. You are in charge of sales. You are meeting XYZ milestones. Here are your tasks. The how can either be thought about as how you're approaching the work. So if you're leading sales, you're in charge of collaborating with folks internally and externally, maybe identifying new customer bases. And then you can also talk about the organization's values or core competencies. So at Google, we thrive in ambiguity. That's one of our values. So we can talk about how we might handle ambiguity as it shows up in our work. And then finally, optional, as I alluded to before, what good looks like, and then layering on top what great looks like, what exceeding expectations looks like. There are certainly, as with all of these conversations, some hiccups that we have some strategies to help mitigate. The first is relying too heavily on creating sort of a contract of, if I as the IC do X, Y, and Z, I will end the year with this rating and this promotion. That is dicey territory. I'm sure in a lot of our jobs, we deal with dynamic situations, novel challenges. We never know what to expect in our day, maybe tomorrow, but certainly months from now, years from now. So it's hard to pin down exactly, if I do X, Y, and Z, you will give me QRS. So we can encourage folks to treat expectations conversations as an opportunity to align on goals, what's the outcome you're looking for, and brainstorm and ideate on some approaches to getting there, but letting the individual contributor actually chart their course and bring their own unique approach to getting to the goal. You also want to acknowledge that work is not a checklist. It would be great and really easy if it were, but unfortunately that's not the case with a lot of roles and jobs today. For the second pitfall, the IC and the manager may not agree on the scope of work or the portfolio. If that's the case, if potentially the IC is looking for something different, something challenging, it's an opportunity for a jargony term called job crafting. You can lean on that career conversation to understand what's motivating you, what's driving the IC, and create opportunities either on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, so they can have those moments where they're engaging in either really impactful work or growing their skill set to try to create that balance. This runs us right into performance conversations. So this is a good moment to check in on those expectations. What kind of progress has been made against those expectations? How has the IC been performing? Ideally, this is happening throughout the year, not just one moment at the end of the year when you're receiving a rating, but we understand some companies, how they structure these kinds of conversations. Officially, maybe there's only one. We'd empower you as either ICs or managers to make sure these are conversations happening more frequently. For ICs, all upside here, particularly having these conversations more frequently. You get to align on your progress and your performance and get that coaching and feedback that you need to improve. And then, hopefully, no surprises when it comes time for ratings. For managers, you get to help your team improve. They're not going to improve unless they know they need to. So this is a good opportunity to do that. Help them identify themes over time, patterns of behavior that you can address and coach, and then seed future conversations so that there are no surprises come the end of the year. What you can cover in performance conversations. First, I'd say if this is directly tying into a rating moment, making sure that ICs really understand the rating scale, what each of those ratings means, and how it impacts other things like compensation. It's also a great time to revisit expectations. So specifically, the progress made, what went well, what could have gone better. Take a moment to reflect backwards, but then these should not just be backwards-looking conversations. We should be able to leverage the insights we learn from looking backwards and apply it forward. Okay, great, what's coming up next week? You've got this client meeting, and then you know you have this great task in your project manager role. From reflecting backwards, we learned that taking some time to prepare, that's how you were especially successful in your last client meeting. So let's go ahead and block your calendar before that next client meeting to make sure we can carry those learnings forward. And then finally, are these still the right expectations? Have priorities shifted? Are we maybe misaligned? Do we need to add additional clarity to the expectations? Better to handle those now, sooner rather than later. And then finally, the last topic, well-being. Sometimes this comes up on its own in separate conversations. Sometimes you can weave it into a performance conversation. From what I've learned as being a manager, everybody thinks about well-being pretty differently. What it means to them feels different. How they can increase their own well-being feels different. For some folks, it's, I want to close my laptop at the end of the day and totally check out. And as long as I can do that and maintain reasonable work hours, my well-being is great. Other times for folks, their well-being is really impacted by not feeling like they're doing impactful work or having kind of a chaotic environment, changing goals rapidly. So knowing what those drivers are for well-being is so critical to a manager being able to help and support. So as a manager, ask. Hopefully, you can convey your IC shouldn't share anything they're uncomfortable with sharing. But as a direct report, if you have a trusting relationship, you can build that over time by sharing what drives your well-being. There are definitely some hiccups with performance conversations that we want to chat about. The first being, particularly if it's a moment throughout the year that you're checking in and the manager and the IC disagree on performance. This is tricky. Performance ebbs and flows from day to day. Nobody is super consistent every second of every day. So I think acknowledging that and sharing some concrete examples from each person's perspective of how they've been showing up and how they've been performing. Then you can talk about how either performance could have been better, strategies to use for the future, or how great it was, why something was especially outstanding. The next steps from there, refine expectations. If it's a lack of clarity, you need additional detail. You should certainly agree to have more frequent check-ins. Keep touching base. Misalignment is a signal that you need to be talking more. Share feedback, and then when I say documenting, jotting down some notes for reference. We don't need serious documentation here. If you are at a place of needing serious documentation, chat with your HR folks if you have them in a smaller startup. But this does not need to be lengthy, serious, intense documentation, jotting down some notes. The second hiccup, if you are combining a performance conversation with a compensation conversation, just knowing that the IC might not be in a mindset that they're most receptive to feedback. So if you are at the same time giving them constructive feedback and telling them that their raise is substantially less than they anticipated, that's not the moment that they're gonna be able to take that feedback and learn from it and apply it in the future. So if you can separate them out, that's what we recommend. If your company does want you to have those conversations in the same moment, it makes it incredibly critical to have informal performance check-ins along the way throughout the year. That's when folks are going to be able to really receive and learn from the feedback that you as a manager are giving them. Last one, if managers are able to share the percentage of folks in each bucket. So at the top of what you should cover in a performance conversation, we mentioned a rating scale bucket. Certainly be transparent, like share everything you can, but if you're not sure what you should or could share, check to see if there are any policies. Align what you do with any official policies. If there are no policies, chat with another manager, chat with your manager, chat with somebody to align on, hey, what are we sharing? What are the norms here? So that some employees don't have different information or more information than others. Question time. Do folks have any examples? Does anything come to mind of either really great or really not so great experiences having either performance or expectations conversations?
So my experience was that for the bulk of the year, the fiscal year, I had been getting promotions, I had been getting raises and accolades, and then kind of was the company was going to do layoffs, and I was being told I was not on the list to get laid off. I was not on the list. There was nothing to worry about, and including getting like marketing awards and like marketer of the quarter and stuff like that. And then I was completely blindsided by getting terminated. So that was like all along I had been being told everything was great and awesome. And then it was just like drop of the hat, it changed. So, and it was even difficult for I had talked to some of the like executive leaders after the fact, and even some of them were saying that they were surprised that I hadn't been told other things throughout the time, that I was just getting positive feedback.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And yeah, and I think that layoffs are particularly hard and painful and sometimes feel senseless. I do think like the theme of false hope, as managers, it's a struggle between trying to sort of validate and like recognize your employees, and also it's not doing them a service to lead them to believe that something is coming that's not. And obviously, as ICs, that's not fun. Yeah.
So at one of my earlier career positions, I was basically starting up the entire marketing department for this organization, and I kept getting all of these accolades for the company, and I was told I was doing great work, and then I was able to pull the data and show the increase in sales and the increase in overall work done. And I had the conversation with my employer of, okay, so I've done this for the last year and a half. How do we move forward? How do I grow as a professional? And I, in my mind, had 3 goals: either get a title change so that I could move up, have more pay, or have someone hired underneath me so that I could work less because I was working a lot. And they said no to all of those. And it was just really devastating for me as a professional, being like, I have literally done everything right. And they, wrote it off as we're just not at that stage of growth in our company. We just can't afford to do this. And I'm just like, cool, then you don't get to have me anymore. And it was really empowering to be able to say that and to move on, but it was still so frustrating to see, even when you do everything right, and even when you can show all of the things that you've done for a company, that sometimes they're just not in the position to do anything that you want them to do, and you just have to leave.
Yeah. And in some ways, getting that information does let you make the decision, even though it's unfortunate to feel like your manager and your employer are not supportive of your goals. Yeah. I'd be curious, are there any folks from a manager perspective that like struggle with these best practices?
Oh, I was actually about to share a good example, I think at least. We had a situation where my direct report was underperforming, unfortunately, and I still remember how my heart was just pounding all the way through this conversation, but I had to pretty much give the feedback that, hey, we need to, change something around here, because either you are doing the things that are not valued by the company and they're not aligned with the expectations, or we just need to pick it up. That's it, period. And we went through a coaching phase, and this person is still employed, doing great, and yeah, it's up to the expectations, and the performance is accurately measured with quantifiable data, because some KPIs, and yeah, it's transparent. Hopefully it's transparent to the person. So there are success stories there.
I think it's good to remember that there is a lot of within person variance in performance, and sometimes more than between person, because we tend to think of like high potentials or high performers, but everybody throughout their career is going to go through different phases of what you're facing and with the environment that you're in.
Good afternoon, and congratulations to everyone for having made it through Startup Week. It's been quite a week. I'm John. I'm the founder for Emerge, and we're 7 years in, and I have a couple leaders in the background, so hopefully they don't bring this home. But mistakes I made early on as an early stage founder was any performance conversation without data went awry, right? And even live, real time with those conversations, as I was reeling and backstepping, right, then leading to expectations without objective criteria, for career growth and trajectory. And I think that created a lot of melee in the environment. So what we've done as consequent, I think what has allowed us to foster a culture of more engagement is constant and consistent measurement and holistic measurement, not just performance, but culture, engagement, contribution, quality of work, compliance. And so it has allowed us to clear the deck and eliminate the noise so we can get to the good stuff, which I think was the last bullet about well-being, right? Because at the end of the day, I think we've been at these people sessions for 4 days, and I think what everybody's really struggling with is how do we engage, whether in-house or remote, how do we get people to buy in? And, you know, for us, we've learned that just baseline expectation communication, measurement against that communication, firm understanding of what those measurements mean and their impact to the business, so we can get to the real good stuff, which is the people and their personal adaptations. But certainly, I've seen the biggest mistakes and the biggest challenges come from expectation setting as a result of these performance conversations that aren't tied to criteria. And so hopefully we can avoid that going forward too.
Totally agree. And I really appreciate your nod to a holistic measure of performance. There's a fair amount of research that speaks to, you know, a brilliant jerk might make great strides towards your goals and your outcomes, but how that deteriorates the morale and how effective your team is able to be as a whole is really, really limited by somebody who is surely, you know, accomplishing your what pretty effectively, but a disaster in the how department. So a holistic look at performance is really important, and having clear criteria, aligned expectations for folks, so important.
I'd be curious, how many of you are at organizations that use some form of like what and how, like impact and values both being considered in how people are evaluated? Yeah. I've run into more people recently that sort of have the impact as the only outcome that matters, like the what is the only thing that matters. And I always like to bring up Wells Fargo as an example. If you are familiar with what happened to Wells Fargo a couple of years ago, there was a lot of incentive for them to have as many accounts as possible. And so people were creating fake accounts. And I think generally your values, your how are meant to be the counter to, it's so easy for, you know, deliver as much as possible, go as far as you possibly can, to have a side effect of sabotaging others within the organization, destroying collaboration, and also not prioritizing the ethical, in that situation, legal choices that you should be making as part of your work too. Anyone else want to share on expectation setting or performance reviews?
Or maybe any other hiccups that they've come across that they'd like to try to problem solve with the group?
Hi everyone, my name is Lexi. I'm a director of marketing for a startup social impact marketing firm here in Denver. I just wanted to make a comment on the women who kind of shared their stories earlier. A hiccup that I've noticed is sometimes upper level leadership being so eagle eyes view that they might empower or, you know, give accolades to team members that you might be working on, you know, certain performance pieces with. So one thing I found is having to be really vocal with our leadership team in terms of the things that I'm noticing with employees, the things that I'm working on with them, to avoid situations where someone is maybe receiving more feedback than not earned, but, you know, maybe more feedback than what's needed in that moment to achieve what we're trying to achieve. And I think sometimes when leadership provides that additional like positive feedback, it can make the manager manager's points and voice and insight to the employee a little less like receptive, because now if they're receiving positive feedback on another side, they might not understand what you're seeing that everyone else is clearly not. So I think that's really important, to make sure that like as a manager, you're vocalizing those goals for each team member and ensuring that leadership is aware of it and that they're not creating conversations around certain things when you are, working on a goal.
Yes, 100%. We have talked a lot about, I've had conversations with colleagues about the importance of making sure different levels of leadership are aware of what's going on, there's clear communication, and that like either, like a middle level of management or senior management is supportive of investing in managers. Being a manager is hard for those of you who are managers. It's really hard work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of investment. And sometimes we can get in the mindset of once you become a manager, you still have all of your individual contributor work and then some other folks that you're gonna make sure are doing okay. So carving out the time to invest in your direct reports is so important. I'm a really big advocate of that.
Go ahead and move on to comp conversations. So originally, we were going to try to get a comp person to come and speak about comp. And people said, you know what people care about on the people track? They want to talk about comp. So I have to put out this huge disclaimer. Neither of us are comp people. I have worked on compensation conversation guides. It's very hard to speak in general terms about comp conversations when there are such different situations that startups can be in from a comp perspective and very different comp philosophies. Maybe in some situations, lack of comp philosophies guiding the decision making. So, we tried our best. I think one point that I would like to make is we're advocating for having comp conversations outside of these performance conversations. So again, it just can take a lot of the air out of the room to suddenly be like, and this is what your raise is going to be for the year, things like that. When you want to focus on, multiple aspects of performance. And ideally, comp moments can be a moment that you can celebrate together. So why should you have a comp conversation? For managers, you're delivering that information, you're explaining, because that's another thing is you probably know a little bit more about how this decision is being made than they do. So helping them kind of come along for the journey. Some of it's performance, probably, but some of it are these other factors. It gives you an opportunity to highlight if you are using discretionary budget. So for example, if there's kind of an estimated amount, what they should be getting, but you or somebody else in their management chain have decided to give them a little bit more, that's a nice thing for you to be able to celebrate. And it also is just a nice sort of moment to reflect on the positive performance contributions that this person has made. Again, I'm assuming a pay-for-performance model. I don't actually know anybody that works at a not pay-for-performance organization, but assuming that their performance is going into what they're receiving in the comp conversation, it's a moment for you to call out, this is real impact. You've changed the organization. We are rewarding you because you've changed the organization for the better. For ICs, it's a moment for you to ask, what led to this? Why am I seeing this? Why is this maybe different from something that I've seen before? And you also have a moment to ask about what does it look like to increase future rewards? So that might be things related to what will it look like with promotions, things about pay band. Maybe your manager won't answer every question that you have, but by having a comp conversation, it sort of gives you a little bit of time to explore what's on your mind when you are seeing your comp. So every good comp conversation I've been part of starts with talking about my performance. And I try to do that as a manager too, where you're really going back to the developmental conversations you've had, to the performance review conversation, and not just saying like, you're so great. You did the greatest job. We're going to give you a lot of money because of your greatness. But actually getting into the like nitty gritty of like, you delivered this and that changed, our department. You did this, so that they get to feel validated by what they specifically did, not just sort of like, you got this number on your rating. That means you get this amount in your award. I think another thing that could be really impactful is giving people something that they can visually see to see the award amount. I don't know if you've ever had a comp conversation where somebody just tells you the number over the phone or an unexpected comp conversation. I think generally a lot of comp conversations are, you're not given a lot of time to know that will be the information you're getting. So there's kind of shock on the part of the direct report where you're like, oh, all right. Contextualizing. So by giving people something to look at that's written and not just verbal, it allows them to sort of better process so that maybe they can ask you some of the questions that they want to ask you versus like walking out and being like, sick, what? I think it can also be helpful. Again, we're not assuming like a specific pay or compensation philosophy for your company, but talking about discretion, where discretion is applied, talking about how leveling plays into compensation, and external benchmarks. So oftentimes, people will get a raise and part of it is the benchmark went up and part of it is the performance that went up. And sometimes, the benchmark can go up not a lot and their performance can go up quite a bit or vice versa. So it's good to contextualize even just for, you're going to probably have a future comp conversation with this person. And if they know all of these background pieces of, so our organization did X well, this year, and we had to look at compensation from this perspective, they can maybe start to anticipate like, okay, if those factors change, I might be seeing different numbers in a different conversation. And then to the extent that you feel like you can speak about this, what's required for somebody to, increase this amount if they want to talk about that? Probably like a fair share of people want to ask that kind of question. And so based off of, again, your understanding of where these numbers are coming from, try to be transparent as possible. It's good to calibrate with other managers so that you're not disclosing things that you're not supposed to, but things that they can keep on their mind as they're trying to do their best. They're trying to be impactful in the organization, and they're also trying to help themselves and sort of lift up their career and their development and growth. So some ways that comp conversations can go wrong. I'm very curious if you guys have data points that you're willing to share with us. If not, that's fine. So I think like a lot of times, maybe the most common mistake would be missing this opportunity to celebrate what this direct report did. And I realize most of these hiccups are like things that managers could do or not do. So, if your manager is not doing this and you're a direct report and you're disappointed, I'm sorry, know that like probably they are thinking about these things of what you did and how you were impactful. But, it helps people, same with setting expectations that connect to organizational goals. It helps them see the through line of their sort of place within the broader things that are happening, and the ways that they're positively contributing to the ecosystem coming back to them. Also, I think like if you don't have any information about how decisions are made, obviously it's kind of like a lack of a conversation at that point. And we don't want to, for example, I think very common in organizations where equity is floated, be careful about overselling what that means when it's not quite clear what that will mean. I think that might be a common thing that can happen in conversations, both in hiring and in comp conversations of refreshes within startups. And then I think this is just maybe like a general theme. for all of these conversations, but particularly with compensation, you need to leave space to listen. And there might be emotions that are different than what you're expecting. Because when people get assessed, when they find out what rewards they're getting, it's a very vulnerable, personal moment. And even if you're the best manager ever, you might not know what's going on in the backdrop of somebody's personal life, or what they're bringing to the table when they think about what they're seeing. And so allowing for that to be part of the conversation, and not just saying, here's your info, cool, high five, bye. Because that's maybe a missed opportunity for you to sort of connect, again, bringing it back to the career conversation, connect with this person as somebody that you're going to have a continued relationship with as part of their employment. And an opportunity to talk through constructively of, okay, if this is very upsetting or very unexpected, what do we need to do to move forward constructively? What does it look like for us to be thinking about the things that you're concerned about, the things that are on your mind, proactively in the future? All right. So is anyone willing to share about comp conversations they've had?
So I've had really challenging ones as the manager on the side of the table when the IC has fundamental disagreements about what market rate is. You can do your best to explain the philosophy, but at the end of the day, if you're far apart on what that means, it's been very difficult to find a way out of that.
I'll add to that, hoping folks can learn from my early stage experience and mistakes. Simple things like, and you had put it down, write it down, put it somewhere so you're not looking for it later, on what was promised, right? So sometimes we'll walk away from those conversations laying something out, thinking we're mutually understood, and then we arrive to the point of payout and we forgot what we were going to pay. So simple things, write it down, make sure there's record.
Yeah. Thank you both for sharing.
Thanks. My most frustrating thing is when I'm trying to pay people good market rates. And I know what that is, and so do they. They can go out and look on the internet. And I am thwarted by that, by a manager. And that doesn't happen now because I'm not working in a startup, but when I was working in a startup, I also found it really frustrating when these conversations about bonus, it didn't come from me. My manager didn't know what to tell me. It came from some higher level. And so we just all got what we got. And, this is how the company performed. And I didn't have a chance to sort of set everybody up for that conversation before they got this email that says, this is how it is, too bad. And having that conversation afterwards as a manager, I got a lot of anger, and that's fine because they have their experiences. I was also having that experience, I wasn't warned. And I think as a leader now, I think when I'm in those conversations, I think, remember how you felt when you weren't warned. It is better to stand in front of people who are angry than to have somebody get an email and be unwarned.
I feel like that brings up a deep managerial theme of those moments when you hear your direct report saying things and you in your head are like, mm-hmm. Yes, it doesn't make sense. Yeah. I'll go back and then go back to you.
Thank you. Not a bad conversation yet, but I have a very tricky conversation coming up with my team. We're a startup. We do equity sharing, profit sharing, and this will now be the second year that our team is not going to hit that. We have been, hitting our break evens, but we haven't had that profit to share with our team guaranteed. As leadership, being a 5-year startup, we understand that. We know what we signed up for. Our, direct reports don't necessarily feel that way. And one of the especially tricky parts is that we've now hired on 4 additional people, which is the reason for not hitting that profit this year. We would have hit it this year, but because we chose to reinvest and grow our team, that's going to be really challenging. They have 4 people walking in the door that took that profit from them and are now joining their team and are now going to change our entire environment. We're a 10-person team. 4 new people is a big change. So I don't know if you guys have any advice in terms of just like navigating that conversation, because it's already disappointing knowing that you may not get that profit sharing, especially when it's laid out in a contract for you and sounds very amazing. And then to know that it might be because we have brought on these team members, that maybe we don't have the work for yet or we're getting them ramped up. So it's going to be challenging.
I'd be curious if anyone has any response to that.
I mean, my first one is like, it sounds like you're planning to acknowledge the disappointment. I like approaching these conversations as a human being who is also disappointed that this can't happen quite yet. I like if you go into the conversation acknowledging it, then at least you can take the heat out of like, how are you not mad with me? Like, that person will feel seen and understood, at least on some level, when you acknowledge, like, yeah, this is really disappointing. And finding that right balance of the optimism for the future and what these 4 new teammates can unlock in your future profit growth.
Okay, I'm tracking 2 folks on this side and 1 on this side.
So I actually have a question that's sort of related to compensation. Has anyone ever encountered as a manager and as an IC a gender difference in the pay? And as a manager, I mean, if you're exposed to that, and obviously you know all your ICs pay, and you might notice the difference between, for instance, men and women. How do you react to that if you have in the past? And then as an IC, I mean, I'm obviously not a woman, but when like you get into, after an interview, right, you're discussing your pay or you're discussing your compensation for a raise, like, have you ever brought it up? Like, hey, my colleague is making X and I'm only making this, right? So I'm just curious.
I have thoughts. So like transparent, like you see on the first slide, like I work for Google. The great thing is we have so much data and can therefore conduct the analyses we would need to conduct. And, pretty big company, we've got the resources to like rectify that situation. Like we have the data and the power to not let that happen. Startup environments don't necessarily have that data at that scale to identify those issues proactively or the resources to rectify. So like my advice to you or to anybody who is seeing those kinds of discrepancies, say something. Bring it up to either your peer management group or folks up the chain and ask questions, maybe approach with curiosity. You might not have all of the context, and that's also an approach that is a little, doesn't put people back on their heels and in a defensive spot. If you can approach with curiosity and ask questions about additional context, and then highlight maybe some of the concrete impact that teammate has brought to the table. Try to align similarities of I see this person doing X, Y, and Z, resulting in this impact for the company. I see this other person doing the exact same thing. help me understand the differences that we're seeing here. I'm a big proponent of like call those moments out. We have like formal roles of like unbiasing champions in these like big evaluative decision conversations. So it's a tough role, but don't be afraid to play that role.
I do want to acknowledge we're at time, and there were a couple of other comments. We're happy to keep going, but also want to formally just say thank you for coming to our session and for engaging. And I really hope you enjoyed Denver Startup Week. And for those of you going to the after party celebration reception, I hope you enjoy.